Let's see. I should be live, but I wanted to test just to make sure audio's coming through properly and everything. If you can hear this and you're in the chat, please let me know so I can see if all these settings are correct. Oh my goodness. That's a lot. Yeah, so, okay. This should work pretty well. Let's see. Alert box. Let me see something here. I think we can kind of... There we go. Okay, yeah. I just want to kind of cut some of the sound for that, just because it's a little distracting. Okay, I am being heard. That's awesome. All right. How's everyone doing out there, by the way? All right, so I'm going to get ready and prep just a couple more things, and I'm going to leave you guys with a little countdown, and I'll be back in 5 minutes. Everybody get ready for a show. Hopefully, we'll all learn a little bit about DMing today. So I'll be right back. God, what a weird day to start a show. Everyone, welcome to Mastering the Game. I am Jason Massey, and I've been a pro dungeon master now for 8.5 years, and that is a weird thing to say. For anybody out there who is just joining us and has no idea who I am or who we are as a show, I figured I'd give a little introduction. And for everybody who does know who we are, kind of tell you what this show is trying to be over the next few months, hopefully. I've wanted to do a show now for a while that tackles just a random topic each week. And I'm going to ask for your feedback over the next couple of weeks, and we'll kind of figure out a format and see what's going on. I warn you, today's topic is going to be tricky. I had a completely different show planned as of Tuesday. Wednesday came, and it was a huge shock, to put it mildly. But I kind of got to thinking after that I don't want to make things political, but I do want to be honest with you guys. And I want to be honest with you guys in a way that I haven't necessarily had a chance to. Anybody who's emailed me or messaged me on Discord, Facebook, any of that, and they ask for advice, I try to set expectations and give you guys the best advice I can. I have also tried on Patreon to do a little DM workshop a couple of times, and it never quite clicked. It just didn't feel right because the first iteration we had was like a PowerPoint presentation, and it was so weird. I never felt like I was connecting with anybody. The second iteration we had was kind of a higher tier, meeting up with a couple of people, and it just wasn't, that didn't click because there wasn't really enough engagement. There wasn't enough questions. I thought a live show would be kind of cool. Like, I thought this would be a way to interact with you guys, and hopefully we'll all figure out what we could be doing better, because the truth is no one's perfect at this. DMs, GMs out there, whether you are getting started, whether you've been doing this for years, whether you're thinking about jumping in and you're just kind of, I don't know, putting stuff in a notebook, collecting it for later, there's always going to be stuff that you're weak at. I feel like I'm a little weak at scene description sometimes. I have a hard time describing the sights and smells in a place, and as of Arc 4, I'm trying to get a little better at that, to not glaze over things and not assume people are in my head and just know what something looks like. On top of that, welcome to anybody out there who has never heard of Dungeons and Randomness, has no idea who we are, the one or two people out there who may be jumping in. We're a show that's been around for 8.5 years. We started in 2012. We're getting ready for our 9th anniversary in April, and we kind of fell ass backwards into this big world. I started with one group, and I really liked playing. We set up multiple groups now. There are 4 on the show, plus Patreon stuff. I play 2 games with high-level patrons, and I do that once a month with them each. There's a Curse of Strahd game that's super augmented. It's not really Curse of Strahd, but it's in that theme, and we're getting ready to start 2 more. So that's pretty much what we've been doing. Now, let's talk about today's topic. Today's topic is the escapism effect. I primarily play D&D. I've played a couple of other things, and some of it is okay. We've played Vampire. We've played, there's Punk Apocalyptic I want to try. There's Mutants and Masterminds and Stars Without Number, all kinds of different systems. The setting doesn't really matter because it's just rule sets and stuff. This is more about a way of thinking, approaching how you get ready and prep a game. Now, whatever the system, it's pretty much escapist fantasy. It's power fantasy, right? A lot of us play because we want to ditch the real world. We want to forget about the real world. And over the next several weeks, my God, I'm going to be talking about all kinds of stuff. I'm going to be going over monsters. I'm going to be going over, setting up long campaigns and building a world and all that stuff. I'm going to be taking votes on Twitter and Facebook. And it would be lovely if you guys jumped on Twitter and Facebook and followed that stuff, and I'll ask you guys what you want to talk about. Sometimes you're going to get the itch to build a campaign, or maybe just insert a little bit of real life flavor into a pre-existing campaign. Now, there's a few different ways to do this, and we're going to tackle them in order of difficulty, I think. In the chat, how many of you guys have a game right now? You have a game, and maybe you're thinking about injecting a little real life stuff into it. And this could be anything. It's hard not to be influenced by things in your everyday life, especially in 2020. Like, let's go back to this last year. I mean, there is so much to draw from there. And I think there's ways to do it in good taste. And I think that we honestly could learn a lot from yesterday. And I'm going to get ready, and my game is on hiatus, I think. We're going to be talking about more world building soon, but let's talk about yesterday really quickly. Let's try and put politics to the side, because I honestly don't feel like yesterday was about politics. It definitely has a political slant, and I think you can tie yesterday's actions to one party specifically, but it was a group of extremists. These are, well, they were terrorists. Let's not, this was, I think if this were any other group, I think we would have called it that. And I bet you're wondering why I'm mentioning this, because even something like yesterday, I think it's going to color certain ways you approach your game. It's hard not to have that shine through, even if it's subconsciously. It's kind of tough to not have the news paint your worldview a bit. And honestly, yesterday was insane. I don't think any of us have seen anything like that here in the U.S. That was unprecedented to me. That's stuff you see in textbooks. 4 people died yesterday because of that. And it's really difficult to not want to talk about that, not want to go to social media, not want to get confirmation from the rest of the world that everyone's not crazy. This was a group of extreme individuals, let's say. Now, I mention all this because let's say you wanted to inject something akin to what happened yesterday into your game, or the coronavirus, or something like that. It doesn't have to be the coronavirus, but it's really tough if you want to tell a story about a plague in 2021. Good luck not having it compared to 2020. It's going to be. So how do you do that without making it farcical, without without looking like you're just, doing a ripped from the headlines thing? How do you do it without being disrespectful? I want to start by showing you something. There was lots of video yesterday. And there was tons of video yesterday, and it was infuriating if you're paying attention to the entire thing. Now, I'm going to show you something, and then I'm going to tell you why I'm showing it to you. So, take a look at this.
What happened to you?
I got maced.
You got maced?
By the police.
And what happened? You were trying to go inside the Capitol?
I made it like a foot inside, and they pushed me out, and they maced me.
What's your name? Where are you from?
My name is Elizabeth. I'm from Knoxville, Tennessee.
And why did you want to go in?
We're storming the Capitol. It's a revolution.
Thank you. Ma'am?
Now, why did I show you that? One, the level of disconnect there is unbelievable. The sense of entitlement, I want to trespass in our nation's capital, and I don't want any repercussions. Under the circumstances, mace was the kindest thing that could have happened to that woman. She wasn't arrested. She wasn't stunned. She wasn't batoned. She wasn't shot. It's amazing. So the reason I'm showing you that is because that is a real-life example of the bad guys not realizing they're bad guys. Now, I'm not trying to paint everything in black and white. I'm not trying to say that this is an easily solved situation. But look at the word that was used there. Revolution. Do you know of a revolution that happened where people weren't murdered? Because I don't. Any of the famous ones. It's people die in a revolution, and how quickly that was bandied about. I got maced. Boo-hoo. Poor me. I wanted to go murder. Whether you went there to kill someone or not, you were there as an accomplice to murder. People died yesterday. And I think if these people found the people that they were looking for, more people would have died yesterday. But they don't see themselves that way. They see themselves as revolutionaries. They see themselves at the next Boston Tea Party. They think they're going down in history books as liberators, as these freedom-loving, just American as apple pie people. And I think that there's a level of disconnect for a lot of us who have watched cartoons, who have watched movies, who have designed our own campaigns. And there's a question that gets asked sometimes, especially if you have been, chasing the big bad for a while. How does this bad guy not see themselves as the bad guy? At a certain point, yes, your wife died, and now you freeze people in order to, like, you still have to realize you are the bad guy. Some people don't. There's a level of disconnect so grand that they can't overcome it. And I think that is a lesson that we could take into our campaigns and kind of learn from that. And it can be frustrating at times to see that kind of stuff in the news, because this is real life. And shittily enough, there are people in the real world who think that way. Now, have any of you out there designed a big bad and you had trouble kind of pinning a motivation to them or making their motivation seem justified in the face of everything they've done? Basically, do the ends justify the means in your bad guy's eyes? So, okay, I'm getting some yeses in the chat already. And that's a good thing, because someone who doesn't think like Elizabeth there that we just saw kind of has a hard time justifying doing bad things for the sake of them, right? And that's a good thing. That means you're sane. That means at least you're tethered to reality. Congratulations. I'm very proud of you. But you need to start thinking like a big bad. The first arc of our show, there was a guy named Xanon Carter, and he was a king in the Southwest, and he wanted to expand territory, hated humans, and just loved humans, hated everyone but humans, and just distrusted everyone who wasn't human. And you can trace that back to certain events that happened on the show. That doesn't justify anything. It just explains. So as time went on, and there was a genocide, there was, tens of thousands of people died. And you could very easily say, why? Because you had a bad run-in with someone who was a vampire or a warforged or a tiefling, and you had a bad day, and that influenced your entire outlook on every race that isn't human. And that sounds ridiculous, but how many of you have parents who are at least a bit racist? Because the further you go back generation-wise, the more acceptable it was. My parents were crazy racist. And I asked my mom one time, why, let's say Hispanic people. She had a name for them. I'm not going to repeat that. But she was working as an assistant, an administrative assistant, in a nursery, and everybody who worked in the actual labor portion of this business were immigrants, some legal, some not, and she hated them. I'm talking really hated. And I asked her one time, because I needed to understand. I'd never felt that way. And I needed to understand that side. So if you were to ask an Elizabeth, who was maced, why do you feel entitled to a revolution? Why do you feel like this is justified? And I asked her, and the best she can come up with was, she got into an accident one time, and the person driving was Hispanic, and they didn't have insurance, so she had to pay out the nose. That was the best she had. This wasn't like her family was slain by a Mexican tribe. It was just one incident, and it was completely justified. And this obviously was a catalyst. This is something she probably grew up hearing, and it was perfectly acceptable. My mom was white, so still is white, I assume. But that's something in her head that was just justified. It's like, yeah, of course, I feel this way. And that's astounding to me. I think if we started writing our big bads or just people in cities, I think that gives you a lot of color. Let's say we go to the city of Brightport. City of Brightport is this really, built in layers on top of itself, kind of a New York, Chicago vibe, very, very tight, packed in on itself. So there's a lot of history there. And there's also a lot of immigration because it's got this massive port area, and you have people coming in from all around the world and settling. Brightport is the first thing most of these people see if they're going to Alara. And you're going to have people in Brightport that are quote-unquote fun NPCs, right? NPCs who probably think a lot like you. And I'm putting a lot on each one of you out there, but ride with me. They're going to think probably pretty even keel, right? Moderate, like centrist, maybe leaning left, whatever. But a lot of them are going to have opinions based on run-ins that they've had, right? So if there's a dwarf bar in town and they went one time and got the shit kicked out of them because they weren't tough enough, or they tried an arm wrestling thing and tried to cheat and got, that can color an NPC or PC's perspective about, not just that bar, but maybe dwarves in general, right? That's something you can go down the list and think about how these NPCs have interacted with other people in their lives. How have they made it this far, right? Do they have friends? Do they have enemies? Do they have some history, some organic, run-in with someone else in the city? And I think that is something you can draw tons of stories from, or at the very least, have an NPC that reacts realistically. An NPC feeling real, feeling like a character to your friends, to your players, however you want to put it, is one of the greatest feelings in the world. If they walk away and they can stare in your eyes during the session, they see you doing the voice, they see you acting this out, they know you wrote this, but they still feel an emotion, whether that's, oh, I love that character, or I hate their guts and I want them to suffer. You elicited a response. And sometimes having a bad guy means saying and doing something that you would never do in real life. Now, we're going to talk about 3 different ways we can somewhat inject some real life into a campaign. And we don't have to use yesterday as an example, but I'll take the first example we have in the chat. Give me something in real life. It could be good, bad, otherwise, whatever. Bring it. And I'll see if I can do it in the 3 ways that I'm about to talk about. By the way, thank you, everybody who is in the chat. I really appreciate you guys spreading the word and hanging out with me for a while I do this. Hopefully, this takes off and you guys enjoy it, and we'll be able to talk about all kinds of shit. Okay, wow, Brexit. Well, that one's fun because that is one of the rare examples where I don't have to look and go, oh God, fucking USA. Like, it's been such a nightmare the last 4 or 5 years that, honestly, yesterday did not shock me like I think it would have 5 years ago. And that is troubling because that means there's a piece of me inside that is numb to this, that expects it, expects the worst out of my fellow man. And that's terrible. I don't want that. Now, Brexit. I'm going to give you my very loose understanding of what Brexit is. So, unlike the U.S. is a collection of states, and we're all under one entity, right? We're the United States of America. The UK is a little different because you're dealing with less space, but you have these rich dynasties of culture and different forms of education and all that. So you have Scotland and Ireland and Great Britain and all that stuff. You have all of these different peoples who, Jesus, just in Britain alone, their accents vary wildly. Usually in the States, you can have a New York accent. And then you go to Boston, you're a Boston accent. You go to California, you kind of get a little surfer bro sometimes. You go to the Midwest, and you're gonna maybe hear a bit of consonant dropping and kind of a southern drawl. If you go to the deep South, like Alabama, that's a completely different accent. But those places are divided sometimes by thousands of miles. In the UK, it's very different. You don't have to travel far before you hear somebody with a Welsh accent, or someone from the heart of London with it. It's different, and it's kind of crazy. Now, culturally, Brexit doesn't mean a whole lot, I don't think. And again, is very limited understanding. This is from a trade perspective, and Great Britain essentially taking what has been the last, 150 years or so? I'm terrible with world history. and removing themselves from that. That means they have to find either new trade routes or renegotiate every bit of import and export that comes out of their country. That's insane. They are completely going to change their way of life for who knows how long. Now, it's completely possible that, some leader is going to come along at some point and say, okay, let's fix this mess. Can we come back? And they do that. But in 2016, much like in the US, the UK was going through some growing pains. And there was this kind of xenophobic behavior that Britain would be far better off if they weren't connected at the waist to all these other places. If it was just Britain, right? Make Britain great again kind of vibe. That has not worked out stellarly, and it was a rash decision. They essentially called their girlfriend in the middle of the night and broke up, but didn't think about the fact that you share a car, and the lease is in both of your names, and what are we going to do? Who gets the pets? What's happening? They didn't think about any of that. They just thought about leaving. Now, let's say we wanted to take some of that. Let's say that, let's go to the mainland. Let's say there was a city. Let's put them in the middle. Hell, let's say Winter Haven, actually. So we're going to the west, and we're in the northwest of this continent. And they want to secede essentially from Alara. Now that means all of their trade has to be renegotiated, and, it has to be, basically what they're saying is, fuck you guys, we don't need you, but we will take some weapons and armor and sugar and whatever. And they have to renegotiate every bit of diplomacy and trade and tariffs and all that stuff, right? Okay. Let's deal with 3 ways we can do that. Let's start with the first way. Vague references. So this is when you draw from real life experience, maybe something in the news, maybe something from a movie, whatever, and you're kind of playing with it in your world, but it's cast very much through the lens of how someone in your world would view this, right? Now, obviously, this is not a one-to-one in our world, in Alara, because, the trade route example doesn't quite hold. They were already... Them seceding probably wouldn't change too much, right? But there are ways we can make it so that it kind of has a bit more play. Like, if there were a leader in Winter Haven that traditionally did not get along with, say, Aubrey. Well, now you have a leader that has kind of emotionally seceded, right? We don't want any trade from Aubrey anymore. We'll get our goods... we'll get our clerics, we'll get our holy people from, we'll just go a little further. We'll go to Esterhold, fine. And we're going to get them from Esterhold now. That is going to radically change how fast things get to Winter Haven, how much it costs, because it's obviously you're going to have to go through the mountains, or you're going to have to find a way to get things from a place that you probably didn't think that far ahead on. And that is a way that we can kind of make it, it's not a one-to-one, but it's a little closer. Now, if you wanted to put that in your campaign, but you didn't want someone to accuse you, it's like, oh man, this is just X. This is just Brexit. Then you'd probably just kind of toy with the idea, right? You'd have one loudmouth maybe in a temple, or maybe an assistant to some sort of lord or king or something like that, and they are just kind of spouting their mouth off, right? So you plant seeds, and you can kind of play with that without it being a one-to-one, where you're just, you watched Riddick one night, and you decided it's like, okay, well, there's this rogue, and he could see in the dark, and he's bald and chiseled, and you're going to get 2 sentences into that, and they go, oh, that's Riddick. That's the thing. you can kind of play with it though. It's like, okay, well, he has I don't know, it's a drow and this really really good dark vision. But you can come up with something other than they're blind in the light, because that's going to get you. But if you had something like maybe vampirism or something like that, and you can start to kind of play with that. So giving very vague hints at what you want to do, and maybe have your players take it from there. How would they deal with this? Do they take this in a diplomatic direction? So whether they know it or not, you're casting them as sort of a historical do-over type of thing. Could we talk these people out of a Brexit situation? Can we fix, in a fantasy world, what couldn't be fixed in real life, at least at the time? So you toss that out, see if they're interested. Let's say they pass on it and move on down the road. Then you're free to kind of push things in that direction. But here's how I would do it. Don't look at it as a storyline. Look at it as a way an NPC feels. If we go back to that one loudmouth, and they're really pushing for a secession of some sort from the rest of the continent. They want to be, they want to be on their own. Maybe they get in the ear of somebody and they kind of push it forward, but you can change things based on the lens of your world, how it works. Think about magic. Okay, we're going to make Harry Potter jokes, but how would magic change the UK? That's you have to get over that hurdle in a fantasy world right off the bat. So there's things like teleportation. There's things like, if you're playing base D&D, there's things like Goodberry and create food and water. There would be no famine. Like, why wouldn't you just import druids, right? It's like, okay, well, we have a good amount of druids. We'll probably be fine. Right off the bat, you're changing things from how they were in real life. So you're just kind of vaguely insinuating. You're kind of... You have an improv setup, but you're running wild with it right off the bat. Now, the second version of this is the inspired by real events. If you watch a movie, and it's based on a true story, there's a big difference between something biographical, something that is sticking to the beats of what happened, and something inspired by real events. So inspired simply means you have your starting point, right? Let's say Sully. Okay, you're flying an airplane, the engines go out, and now you have to figure out how to land this plane without everyone dying on board. Okay, there's your premise. Boom. Now, there's a big difference between how that happened in real life and how a movie might portray that, right? There might be terrorists on the plane in a movie. There might be all these other difficulties that weren't present in real life because the airplane crashing was enough. But in a movie, maybe it's 2 hours. Maybe you got to fill some time. So maybe there was an uppity passenger trying to break in, and there was, whatever. In your D&D campaign or whatever RPG you're playing, you have the Brexit situation, and right off the bat, you're gonna get comparisons, because now you are starting with almost a 1-to-1. Take that uppity loudmouth. Now they're in charge. Now they are hell-bent on seceding, right? And your problems are going to be somewhat similar to what the UK is experiencing now. Obviously, if they want to lock themselves down, let's say, uppity loudmouth locks down the kingdom, no more trade from anywhere, we're self-sufficient, we can do it ourselves. Now, that, again, fantasy world, you're going to have a bunch of problems there, right? Local wildlife is going to be a problem, or people wanting to hunt on your land, all that stuff. So you don't have to follow it 1-to-1. You don't have to have it be a ripped from the headlines thing, and you don't have to feel like you're on rails, because a lot of times when you start with, let's say you wanted to do a Jack the Ripper thing. So you're chasing an unknown serial killer through the streets of Brightport who only murders at night, only murders prostitutes, let's say. Right off the bat, you're going to have a comparison to Jack the Ripper. But because it's a fantasy world, already you're dealing with classes, you're dealing with magic, you're dealing with potions, you're dealing with all kinds of things that can put a spin on that situation. So let's say you want to recreate Jack the Ripper, so you got your start, right? But let's say this person only wants to collect femurs from people as trophies, and maybe they're trying to collect enough so that they can ground it into dust and use it for some reagent, something like that. So you have 8 kills before they have enough femurs, let's say. So right off the bat, instead of it just being, I want to prevent these deaths, you know that there's a countdown. You know that there's something that they're prepping to do, and you might not find that out till kill 3 or 4. And there's a sense of urgency there, beyond, obviously, just wanting to stop murder. So, I forgot Moobot was on. So, let's talk about the third way. And this is where I would say we haven't talked about that whole social contract with your players, because I think there is a pretty good leeway with the cast of DNR and myself. I think there's a fair amount of trust buildup. But again, I've been playing with them for many, many years. When we first started, there was stuff like, okay, take Brianna's story. I think a lot of people were fairly sure that Brianna's backstory was she was sexually assaulted, because I think that's what a lot of popular media does. And I think people thought that there was a fair to middling chance that that's what I was going to do. And, time passes, we get to the backstory that has nothing to do with it, we move on. You get to a couple of areas like that where, people see you're not taking the low-hanging fruit, and you kind of build up trust. But what if you gathered players with a flyer in the library, or you're meeting online? Because I think, Jesus, 2020 was the most I've seen virtual tabletops just swell and grow. There were multitudes of new modules available, new books, and man, between Fantasy Grounds, Roll20, and Foundry, there are thousands, tens of thousands of players online right now, and there are whole places just dedicated to looking for a group, that type of thing. There's whole Reddit threads based on it. So let's say you're DMing for a group, and you're just sitting down. And here's the story you're pitching, right? You got a real bee in your bonnet. You want to tell the Brexit story, but it's like, okay, what about this and this? And you have this idea in your head for a hook. You want to toss it out. The first way we talked about, which is just kind of vague insinuations, that's, you're in the green, right? There's a very small chance that someone's going to get offended, that someone's going to, it's going to hit close to home. Let's say you're in Oklahoma and you want to tell that story, because to you, it's not fantasy, but this doesn't affect you. This isn't nothing to do with your politics. There's something it's almost a morbid fascination. It's a train wreck to you, but it doesn't affect you. Now let's say you're playing with somebody who actually lives in the UK. Let's say that it does affect them. And let's say that they voted for Brexit. They fought for it. Like, it is just, they see it as the best possible option. And yes, we did, the more real life you inject into this campaign, the higher the chances you're going to piss them off. Now, there are stories that we've told in DNR that we've gotten away with because they weren't necessarily based on actual events, but man, actual events sort of skewed and followed that path. You can make a 1-to-1, right? If you didn't know the Carter stuff took place in 2012, 2013, you might go, oh, is that based on like a Trump thing? Or like, is like, no. They built a big wall to keep people out, and they bet, you could make those claims. At the beginning of Art 2, Elrath got sick. And there was there was half an arc dedicated to, Group 3 rallying around her and trying to find a cure and everything like that. If you didn't know that came out 2 or 3 years before 2020, holy shit. Like, you could make an argument that that's based on real life. I'll give you a good example. Rob and I have different ideas politically. We don't agree on politics, and we try to keep politics out of the conversation. There was something we were tiptoeing into story-wise, and Rob got some vibes. It's like, hey man, is this like a Trump Republican diss? Is this and I had to explain. It's like, no, it had nothing to do with that. Here's what I was thinking, blah blah blah. But I had to explain myself, because if it was something that Rob took offense to, it's a tough sell. You're asking someone to play in your game, and they're going to feel a bit targeted. They're going to feel a bit like you're not only shit-talking their political views, you're shit-talking them. And they have to eat that shit sandwich, and they have to sit there. Now, I think that there is a line. I'm happy to leave politics out of the show. God help me. Yesterday, I wanted to take to Twitter and Facebook, and I wanted to say a bunch of stuff. And if I were sitting with Alex, he probably would have spurred me on. But I wasn't, thankfully. I was sitting next to Brie, and I had the better sense to just not do that. I posted on my personal accounts. Job done. Alex confirms, 100%. Now, there is a line. Stuff that happened yesterday. Let's say, and I don't want to use Rob because that has nothing to do with this, but let's say there was a cast member. Let's call them Dave. Let's say Dave joins the show, and we show up to play just a regular ass session, right? And a lot of the times in the BTS, the behind the scenes stuff, you'll hear us talk about real life, because it's tough not to. Imagine if we went all of 2020 and not talked about fucking COVID, and not talked about how all of our lives were just irreparably changed. Now, to me, COVID isn't a political thing. To other people, it has a huge political slant. There might be people in the chat right now who feel as though COVID is... God help me. I hope you don't think it's a hoax or something, but let's say that there is a political slant to it, and you feel like one side could have done more to help than the other, whatever. Us mentioning COVID is gonna piss you off. I don't want to use the phrase triggered, but it is gonna get under your skin. So let's say Dave joins the show, and Dave walks in, and, let's say 4 or 5 of us are sitting down talking about yesterday, and it's like, Jesus, that was so fucked up. I can't believe this is where we are. And let's say Dave walks in and is 100% on board. He loved what happened yesterday. And he's insulted that they didn't get further, that there wasn't more change, that the election wasn't turned over. Now, that's a problem enough. That's a friend problem or a player problem, depending on how long you've known them. But imagine your campaign is based on something like that. And they call you out. They say, hey, wait. Is this based on, let's say there was some, let's go for the low hanging fruit. Let's say there was an election in your world. And let's say there are 2 candidates. And the players, as a party, can influence that election either by campaigning. Maybe they decide to try and cheat. How are you not going to get that compared to the election in the U.S. right now? How are you not going to get that compared? There are people who are going to see it as farcical. There are people who are going to be insulted, like our friend Dave, who has some ideas. So, going back to vague references, probably not going to piss anybody off with that. Inspired by real events, That's when you're going to get it a little muddy. Now let's take it up to the red. Let's really piss Dave off. Let's just go on the nose with it, because there's only two ways you can do that. One, you are absolutely retelling a story, and you can put a couple of fantasy spins on. But the story you are telling, you have an end goal in mind. Let's say you gather everybody at the library and you say, okay, here's what we're going to do. We're going to tell a story about an outbreak. And this outbreak is going to start to get out of control because your healers, your clerics, your medics are going to come forward and say, this is what you need to do. You need to put alfalfa sprouts in your underwear. Yes, it's uncomfortable. Yes, no one's going to want to do that. But this is what you have to do. You do that for 6 months, boom. We're gonna be free and clear of this, and it's gonna be okay. Well, let's say half of the population doesn't want to put alfalfa sprouts in their underwear, and there's such a wide group of people who it's a conspiracy. It's really not killing that many people. I went by the pile of dead bodies today, and I could walk over it. It's fine. Or they're the people who are just inconvenienced by it and they don't want to do it. So they don't. Your outbreak starts getting bigger, right? But the story you want to tell is how facts and reason and logic are going to triumph, right? The party is going to spread awareness, and they're going to either, try and fast track a cure, or they're going to try and reach out to the people and have them see that this is for their own good. And maybe there's town criers who benefit from scaring people and telling them that alfalfa sprouts actually give you cancer. You're not doing that. You're not putting those in your underwear, are you? Oh my God. Maybe you have to go put these people out of commission. Maybe you have to talk to them and see why they think, going back to the Elizabeth example, why do you think that thing? Why are you telling people this? That's the story you want to tell. Now, Dave's going to have a hard time with that. And in the on-the-nose example, Dave's probably going to walk out of that campaign. I would love to know if anybody in the chat has tried to do something like this, whether it be a ripped from the headlines type of story, or you just wanted to tell a story that someone in your group, or maybe multiple people in your group, just were not on board. They just couldn't do it, right? And you got your po-faced, serious version of that, right? And the only other way you could do an on-the-nose campaign is if it's parody. There was a lovely Kickstarter that I backed a couple of years ago. Actually, give me 1 second. I'll show you. So there was a lovely Kickstarter I backed a couple of years ago called Monsters of Murica. Now, you could probably guess what's in this. Yes, the focus is kind of on the 2016 election, but it's more than that. The campaign setting is America as reimagined as a fantasy campaign meets Mad Magazine, basically. Every page in this book is just kind of taking the piss out of things. If you roll a human, you get something called human privilege. Guy Fieri is the patron saint of flavor. It's parody. It's meant to be taken as a joke. Now, you might get away with something like that, even with a Dave playing, because the joke plays both sides, right? If you lean a bit more to the left, obviously, King Trump and his, all that stuff, right? That is taking stabs at the right. And it's haha, funny, blah, blah, blah. Barring shit that happened yesterday, that's real life. But in a little fantasy campaign like that, you get to kind of take all these frustrating things that are happening in real life and you get to poke fun at them. And it makes you feel like you have a little bit of power, just a little bit of control. And it makes you feel like you can get past a year like 2020, because at the end of the day, it's accomplishing what any good game, any good TTRPG does. You're passing time laughing with friends. Now, let's say you're on the right side. Stuff like human privilege, stuff like, viewing SJWs and like the hardcore. I'll be honest, I'm pissed off at the left sometimes too. There is an overabundance of trying to cancel celebrities and not enough trying to stop what the fuck happened yesterday. And I feel like, just like we have hardcore conspiracy nuts on the right, we have a lot of time and energy spent on things that don't ultimately matter all that much. And yelling at the next Overwatch character because they're not gay enough or black enough or trans enough, or some people say not white enough, not when that's the most inclusive roster in a video game that I've ever seen. I think we're just focusing on the wrong things. So you could tell a story like that in parody, and as long as you're taking stabs at both sides, I think it should be okay. Obviously, you should get clearance from your party before doing something like that, just tossing them into the middle of that, because I think it's two steps below, oh, are you okay with sex in the campaign? Are you okay with, graphic depictions of violence, that type of thing? That I've seen a sheet going around. We did it. Jesus, we did it when we were when Corey was working with us, and we were hosting D&D groups and setting people up like a little D&D Tinder. There was a section of the sheet that was like, okay, what kind of story do you want to tell? Are you adverse to violence? Are you, whatever it was, we kind of had like, check off all your boxes. And just like Tinder, you can kind of whittle things down a little bit. I think you should clear that with your party if you're going to tell one of these stories. If you get to the point where it's so on the nose, you can't deny it. If you get to the point where you're in the red, right? When you start telling this story, you're probably going to piss some people off. Clear it with them. Talk to them about it. Can you handle this? Is this okay? If you're taking stabs at both sides, your odds are slightly better. Because I think a lot of people are too sensitive to hear jabs at their side, because it hits a little too close to home, maybe. But if you're going to tell an on-the-nose story where you're just ripping, like it is Brexit, we're just covering Brexit, but it's in a fantasy world, be prepared for people to reject that. Be prepared for people to get a little pissed off. And I think it's a really fun exercise sometimes to get people to the point where they're a little frustrated and then pull it back, because you can take people on an emotional journey that way and make them feel as though there was a trek. I point to something like Group B. Group B had to go through this place in our world called the Divide. The Divide is described as this terrible stretch of highway that is ambush central, and it's dark and nasty, and it took them many sessions to get through that. I think it was 6 months of actual real life time that they spent, and that did two things. One, it frustrated people eventually, and rightfully so. But they were never so frustrated that they quit, but it did make them feel like they did something when they got through it, right? And for good or bad, that was a journey. So I want to thank everybody out there for sticking around and listening to this. If you want to send an email and give a suggestion for a topic, or if you want to share a gaming story with me, be it good, bad, or ugly, I would love to start doing an assessment, an autopsy of D&D campaigns that have just gone tragically tits up. I want to see if this could have been saved, right? I'd love to do that. I want to go over obsolete and terrible monsters. I want to fix homebrew situations that, for some reason, didn't work for you. Maybe we can save it as a group. And obviously, we're going to work on things that we're all lacking in, right? We're going to go right down the list. So give me your suggestions. You can find me on Facebook and Twitter. Let me throw those up again. Or you can send an email to mastering the game, DANDR, at gmail.com. That's mastering the game, DANDR. And yeah, I'm going to see you next Thursday and every Thursday until you tell me to stop or I get bored. So thank you all so much. I really appreciate it. Everybody have a great week, and please try to take care of yourselves. Good luck with your games.